My name is Catherine Collier. I'm the manager at MeTech Driver Training. We're a not-for-profit road safety organisation, and we provide driver education and training at our facility in Bayswater North. So today's lunchbox chat is cameras versus policing. So first of all, I'm going to attempt some New Zealand words today when we do the official ACRS Acknowledgement of Country. We acknowledge and pay our respects to the many First Nations of Australia who continue to be the sovereign custodians of their countries and the sovereignty of the Maori in New Zealand. We acknowledge the ongoing traditional custodians of the land on which we live, work and learn, and pay our respects to elders who have passed on the legacy of knowledge and culture to the future generations. May this sharing of knowledge through Matauranga, Maori and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders' way of knowing, being and doing guide you with wisdom and courage as it enhances our collective futures. Thank you. So today we have three speakers at our Camera versus Policing. Our first speaker today will be Glenn Weir, Assistant Commissioner, Road Policing Command. Our second speaker will be Alex Jannink from Acusensus. He's the Managing Director. And our third speaker will be Neville Taylor, a Victorian Road Safety Commissioner. So that's how we're going to run. We will have a Q&A box for questions. Please type your question into the Q&A box and we'll be going to those questions after all speakers have presented to us today. So thank you very much everyone for coming, and we may still have some people joining as we get started, but the session today will be recorded and will be available at a later date. So with regards to the topic we chose today, we often hear from the community that cameras are all about revenue raising and police need to be more visible. Like the question is, where are the police? We know they're very stretched for time. And so we often like to address the topics that are raised with us directly. The discussion today is really about helping our members understand the why behind the thinking and what we can all do collectively to ultimately bring down road trauma. So thank you for attending. I'm now going to hand over to Chris Harrison, the Chair of the ACRS Victorian Chapter, and we can get underway. Thank you.
Thanks, Kathy. A great welcome and introduction to our topic for our very second lunchbox chat, which seemed to be quite popular. So thank you for that. And Kathy's also our Deputy Chair at the ACRS Victorian Chapter. And yeah, thank you for that. I will be introducing each of the speakers and they will have around 5 minutes each and the opportunity to share some slides along that if they have them. And as Kathy said, we will then go into a Q&A. So please, as questions come up or thoughts come up, put them into the Q&A, and that's something that we can facilitate at the end of each speaker speaking. And I do ask that people keep themselves on mute until the opportunity to speak through that Q&A time. So welcome, Glenn. First off the ranks here, our Assistant Commissioner for Road Policing Command in Victoria. So if you'd like to introduce yourself a little bit more and your perspective on this topic.
Thanks, Chris. Hi, everyone. It's a great honour to be asked to contribute today. I was really fascinated by the topic, or the which I'll get to shortly. So I've been in this role as the Assistant Commissioner of Road Policing since August 2021. Prior to that, I was the Assistant Commissioner for Eastern Region. I've been a member of Victoria Police for 42 years, predominantly in frontline roles. And as the Head of Road Policing Command, head up the Head of Profession for Road Policing, own a number of resources, the State High Patrols, Major Collision, road policing drug and alcohol section, the road policing enforcement division, which deals with the back end of camera enforcement and some parts of deployment, as well as a large strategy, intel and projects team. I'm also a member of the ACRS Finance and Audit and Risk Committee at an Australasian level, so and a member of ACRS. So, as I said, it's a great honour to speak here. So, for us, Victoria Police and all policing jurisdictions, we know that addressing the trauma caused by speed is probably the biggest single thing that we can do to reduce road trauma. We know that speed contributes to about a third of the deaths on Victorian roads, and this has been a consistent theme over a number of years. Recently, we had a sort of a national forum out, included New Zealand, at the MCG, where we addressed some of the rises in road trauma that every jurisdiction is seeing. And it's really interesting to consider, when you look at yourself in isolation and some of the problems you see, but it was really interesting for us to see that the problems that we're seeing in Victoria this year and the spike in road trauma, which is outside the norm, is being shared by other jurisdictions in Australia and New Zealand, and in particular the causation that people are seeing does still predominantly revolve around speed. So when I saw the theme of today, and I saw it was cops versus cameras, I thought that's interesting, because almost if you look at that in isolation, you can see that, well, do the two actually not, is it a contest, and speed cameras are revenue raising? So cameras started in Victoria in 1985 as a trial, and Victoria Police had a large part to do with road safety cameras, particularly the speed camera component back then. Now it's run by our friends from the Department of Justice and Community Safety, the program. I can see a large number of them online today. Hello, Satana, waving. So, and we work very closely as a key partner. But it is a misconception in some parts of media and a large part of community that in Victoria that the police run the camera program. We certainly do not. And so when I saw cops versus cameras, I thought, well, that's an interesting comment right away, because it sort of goes to that mindset. We are certainly a part of, and the camera program is certainly a part of our road policing efforts in Victoria, but it is part of the whole of government approach and really well run by the Department of Justice and Community Safety. So we were involved early on, as I said, but it's about 25 years since that sort of separation occurred. So it was interesting when you look at so in 1985, the trial started, and then a broader rollout in Victoria in 1989. And in 1989, when the camera program rolled out, the detection rates were around 24% of people who passed the cameras were detected speeding. Within 3 years to the end of 1992, that was down to 4%. So if you take it logically that we know that a third of the deaths are caused by speed, and in that such a short period of time that had such an impact on driver behaviour, in my view, any reference to cameras being revenue raising, well, that defeats that argument straight away. And I think this is further supported when you look at in 1989 in Victoria, there were 776 lives lost on the road when cameras were introduced. And within 3 years, that had almost halved. It was down to 396. So if you look at, in terms of the road safety benefits at a base level, that you can rely on that data to show what's the impact of cameras. Look at the immediate impact in terms of the tangible reduction in people who were detected speeding going past the camera technology, and in 3 years that had changed remarkably, and there'd been a commensurate reduction in the number of lives lost. And for me, that's what we are completely about, is keeping people safe on Victorian roads. So that data, I think, shows quite significantly the impact. And in Australia in 1989, we lost on average 16.7 people per 100,000 head of population to road deaths. In 2021, that's reduced to 4.4%. Now, I know there's been a significant number of other changes in terms of vehicle technology and safety upgrades, road and infrastructure upgrades that have contributed to road safety. But I think if you look at that timeline from 1989 to now and see that reduction, that's real people. That's not numbers. That's people whose lives have been saved, and that's just lives lost, not serious injury collisions. So that equates to, in 1989, Australia lost 2,800 people to road deaths, and in 2021 that was down to 1,123. So that's 1,700 people who are still with us because of reductions in road trauma. Can that all be related to road cameras? Of course not, road safety cameras. But when you look at the evolving technology of speed, red light cameras, distracted driver cameras that have just been rolled out in Victoria, fixed and mobile speed cameras, I think from my perspective, they're an absolutely vital cog in the work that we do as a partner in road safety. And any argument around revenue raising or that police should be out, and it is completely, we know that general deterrence and visibility is a key part of what we do, and we will be making all efforts to improve that. But any argument around that police are being replaced by cameras is a nonsense. Thanks, Chris. I'm happy to take questions or observations, but that's my view of the world.
Thank you very much, Glenn. It's good hearing some of the history as well, but we will save questions till after all three speakers. So do keep popping questions into the Q&A so that we can bring attention to them afterwards. But thank you, Glenn. Okay, we'll move on to Alex Jannink now, who is Managing Director of Acusensus, to hear about this topic from his perspective. Thanks, Alex.
Thanks very much, Chris. Welcome, everybody. I've been involved with the design of perhaps as many as half of the enforcement cameras currently in use in Australia. My start in road safety enforcement was in developing the license plate software for Australia's first average speed enforcement installation on the Hume Freeway here in Victoria. Since then, I've been involved in the design of intersection enforcement cameras, radar speed cameras, average speed, bus lane enforcement, but most recently, mobile phone and seatbelt enforcement programs. So I founded Acusensus at the start of 2018 to address the trauma caused by mobile phone use while driving. And since then, we've expanded the product solution to address more of the fatal road behaviours simultaneously. So at Acusensus, we designed and deployed the enforcement camera technology for the world's first distracted driving program in New South Wales, and following that in Queensland, which also introduced the world's first seatbelt enforcement camera program. Right from the start of the program, we advocated for trailer-based anywhere, anytime enforcement in New South Wales. And I'm really glad that Transport included our trailer in the pilot in 2018, 2019, and then adopted that solution into the ongoing enforcement program. I think that really set that way for anywhere, anytime enforcement, suppress the behaviour across the road network. And I mean, when you look at the New South Wales mobile phone enforcement camera program, it has been extremely effective in changing behaviour, much like the stats that Glenn mentioned on speeding behaviour. You look at New South Wales, it's more than a 6 times reduction in the number of people using their mobile phones on that road network, easily the lowest rate of mobile phone use of any road network that we deploy in globally. And the first 2 years of that program coincided with a 20% reduction in road fatalities in New South Wales. And I mean, as Glenn mentioned, there's been a spike in road fatalities across Australian jurisdictions over the last couple of years, but globally. So across developed world countries, the kinds of countries that we, are seeking to deploy cameras in, road fatalities are going up sort of 10 to 20% per annum. And thankfully, that was not the case in New South Wales. They dropped, and Queensland have also been dropping since their program started as well. And as far as Acusensus goes, we also supply a lot of speed enforcement solutions, the trailer-based solutions now deployed across the regions of Queensland that went live over the last few months, and about half of the cameras in New South Wales for mobile speed camera enforcement. But when I reflect on the topic of today, I think it's worth considering the different community sentiment and attitudes towards mobile phone, seatbelt and speed enforcement programs. When you look at mobile phone enforcement by camera, it has very widespread community support. Even though most people do check or touch their phone while driving at times, almost everybody recognises the extreme danger posed by the use, and they recognise that they shouldn't do it. I mean, the New South Wales government surveys indicate more than 80% public support for mobile phone enforcement by camera. And I think we also see a very strong willingness to change behaviour. And so we saw that once there's these well-communicated penalties, the social media campaigns that came out, the mainstream media campaigns, and almost overnight we saw changes in behaviour once people knew that they were going to be caught and enforced, and it sort of socialised and normalised the fact that this is the wrong thing to do. With seatbelt enforcement, the reality is that only less than 1 in 100 Australians doesn't wear a seatbelt anyway. So the potential for backlash here is actually really small in my view. 90% of the population doesn't even understand why or how you couldn't or wouldn't wear a seatbelt. It is ingrained in second nature to buckle up. So I think there's very little chance of the sort of revenue raising style arguments on the seatbelt enforcement line. Speed, of course, is regarded very differently. So the majority of the driving population likely speeds at times, whether deliberately or accidentally. And I think a lot of people do think that much of that speeding is not dangerous, that they're in control of their vehicle and they will not cause a crash. I think particularly when you look at point speed offences, that people can perceive those as unfair or sneaky, that a lot of people believe that they haven't actually quite done the wrong thing. And I think this is the offence type in which policing is very different to cameras in their community support and regard. So police are able to use discretion where a camera program is not. They're also far more likely to stop a whom than they are a low-range offender. And so from my perspective, the argument of cameras versus policing is most relevant to speed offences and far less relevant to phone use, seatbelt and perhaps even red light offences. I think if I could make a suggestion here, I would suggest that we use point speed in particular to deter high range speed offences and embrace that more widely, while we could be using average speed enforcement to deter the low range speeding that perhaps has a different community perception. And so I think both of those different solutions do have their place. When you look at New South Wales, ACT, Queensland, we could very cost effectively increase the detection of high range speeding. And that would just be by turning on point or even average speed enforcement on all of the mobile phone enforcement camera units throughout those states. As far as I know, we can't do that in Victoria. A different vendor is selected for the program here who I don't think can enforce the speeds with their unit. I think the other impact to think about in policing and cameras is the timeliness of the consequence. So a police stop in real time is more likely to change behaviour than a ticket in the mail a week later. There are a few things we can do to enhance the impact of camera enforcement. One is that we could technologically almost immediately notify the vehicle's registered owner of an offence from the camera system if the relevant government were to allow access into the driver licensing databases for that purpose. But technologically, that's not difficult to do to increase the timeliness. Another option is that we can enhance policing with automated technology. So this is what we do in the United States. So we have the trailer-based cameras screen drivers for speed, license plates, seatbelt, phone use as they go past the trailer. And then that alerts a police officer who could be waiting as close as 200 metres down the road. The police officer gets the images and information on their tablet, and then they can choose to effect a traffic stop. I don't know how I'm going for time here. Do you want me to wrap up, Chris? I'll keep going.
That's fine. Keep going if you've got something more to say.
Okay. I'll just keep mentioning that technology-assisted policing. So we do this in North Carolina for commercial vehicle enforcement for mobile phone and seatbelt. And with just 3 trailers in North Carolina, which is a state that has 50% more people than Victoria, with a geography about 50% less, police are now issuing 6 times more seatbelt offences and 9 times more mobile phone offences. just with 3 trailers in sort of an equivalent geography to Victoria. So it just shows you how difficult these kinds of offences are, I think, for police to enforce, and where technology can really change that quite dramatically. And the final thing I'd say on technology-assisted policing is that what about those offenders that are simultaneously doing multiple dangerous acts, and that where I think a police intervention can be far more effective. So we had an example of a worksite we deployed in Missouri where we would have 1 in 167 drivers there were speeding more than 10 miles an hour over the limit, actively using a mobile phone and not wearing a seatbelt. And when you work through all the fatality risks associated with those activities simultaneously, you could associate that with a 4x, an 8x, and a 6x. So you've got about less than 0.5% of traffic with a 179 times elevated fatality risk over a sober, attentive driver. And so I think that's sort of, you've got this small section of the community in which policing is probably perhaps the only effective way to target it, as opposed to automated cameras. And thank you for your attention there.
Thank you, Alex. Again, it's very interesting to hear some of the opportunities that have been happening and some of the data that's coming out of that. Thank you for that. Okay, I will hand over to Neville, our final speaker, and Neville Taylor being our 4th Road Safety Camera Commissioner, and was appointed by the Victorian Government for a 3-year term on the 6th of June 2022 for that. So welcome, Neville. I'll hand over to you now.
Thank you, Chris, and welcome everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to be a part of this. And thank you and acknowledge firstly Kathy's acknowledgement of country. Thank you, Kathy, and also Glenn and Alex for what they've already shared here, and really I think some good words of wisdom and high-level experience that we've heard there. I just want to, I guess, with what I want to share, I really do want to not assume that everyone will understand what my role is as the Road Safety Camera Commissioner, and in that role, what value does a commissioner, this commissioner, bring to the Road Safety Partnership in Victoria. So I really wanted to give some background, some context around that, and in that, I think, draw out some of that relates to your topic and the theme for today's conversation. So some will be fully aware of this, but it'll be a great reminder. But the Office of the Road Safety Camera Commissioner in Victoria, this is an independent oversight body that was established by the Victorian Government under the Road Safety Camera Commissioner Act 2011. And the purpose of that was to enhance the community confidence in the road safety camera system. Glenn gave us along the length of the timeline since this automated technology started. And bear in mind, it had been well underway when this was established in 2000, under the Act in 2011. The Commissioner, in my role, has an office that is established under that Act to enable the Commissioner to fulfil the powers and functions that are set out in Section 10 of that Act. And you can get that Act online and just educate yourself just exactly what the role and functions and the powers are. It is worth highlighting that this is a feature that only exists in the Victorian jurisdiction. Anywhere else in the world. That's not to say other jurisdictions might not have other processes around ensuring that confidence and the integrity and the governance, but this is the only example of an independent oversight body dedicated to the road safety camera system. So why do we have that in Victoria? In 2010 and 2011, the then Victorian Auditor General published the VIC report into the Road Safety Camera Program. And according to the findings of that review, the VIC report stated that there's a high level of technical confidence in the accuracy and reliability of the equipment used in the road safety system that is required for public trust. The VIC report also acknowledged that making relevant documentation about the system publicly available is crucial for the system's transparency and for the public's peace of mind. So when the then Minister for Police and Emergency Services, the Honourable Peter Ryan MP, introduced the legislation in 2011 to create this independent oversight body, he emphasised the importance of boosting public confidence in the system, and he noted that when people understand clearly that the cameras are accurate and that they only catch those doing the wrong thing, that can lead to the behaviour change that includes drivers being more likely to take a more careful approach, keeping within the speed limits and obeying traffic signals. And his view was that that would in turn promote improved road safety outcomes. And that's probably demonstrated a bit in what Glenn talked about in terms of those road trauma numbers over the years. It was stated in that tabling of the bill that to increase transparency, the Commissioner under the Act will provide credible expert advice about road safety camera operations and the camera system to the Victorian Parliament and the community. So that's my role. That's, as Chris said, I'm now the 4th Commissioner to have held that office over that time. So road safety cameras, we know, play an important enforcement role. They make our roads safer. Even though the cameras they're only one of various road safety enforcement measures that are used, they often, as Alex was highlighting, they often receive criticism from certain members of the public, and particularly more recent years on social media. It's acknowledged that people's perceptions of road safety cameras is based on their personal experiences and the belief of other factors that might have influenced their own driving behaviour at the time. The community needs to see that there's a high degree of integrity and transparency in the use of the cameras to be able to bolster their confidence and inform that perception that they might have. They need to be aware that they are a legitimate and effective application just within the suite of other road safety measures that are used. So in my role, the Commission is required to provide advice to the Minister on any matter in relation to the system, and furthermore, to make recommendations to the Minister to address any systemic issues that have been identified. As Chris said, I was appointed into this role in June of last year. I'm the 4th Commissioner in this role since it started. Can you believe my laptop just let me know it was about to snooze an update? So I'll say goodbye now in case I suddenly disappear, and thanks for having me, but I'll press on. So over the successive commissionerships, those commissioners, they've overseen several formal investigations under the powers of the Act, and they've made well over 100 recommendations to the Minister that have been addressed to different member departments and agencies in the Road Safety Partnership. And these recommendations have ranged quite broadly around improvements in the systems, processes, as well as technology to continually ensure the ongoing integrity and the transparency and ultimately be able to give the community insight to build confidence in the system. Now, all of this information and those investigations and recommendations are all publicly available. I'll post in the chat room after I finish here the website, but the Camera Commissioner has a website where you can access all of that documentation and also submit questions and inquiries. Just in terms of my role, my oversight, I work closely with the Road Safety Partnership, particularly Department of Justice and Community Safety, which is the department with the Road Safety Camera Program unit that manages the program in collaboration with Victoria Police, Transport and Planning and the TAC, along with vendors and contractors. So throughout the year, I have a fairly robust process of meetings, monthly reporting, performance reporting of different cameras in the system, quarterly reporting around ongoing projects and design, along with all the infringement reporting. And at the end of each year, my office works with the department where we're provided with all the yearly review material around all the certification programs, the specifications, all the new projects that we qualify against, all the ongoing reporting during the year. And I report to Parliament annually on my observations of that, the conclusions, and where relevant, make recommendations for ongoing change. So that's sort of the role that the Commissioner plays to ensure the integrity and the transparency. I just wanted to highlight one significant piece of work that commissioners have done, and that is related very much to this topic around public perceptions on the cameras. So former commissioners, Commissioner Voyage in 2017 and Commissioner Lane in 2020, conducted a public perception survey around road safety cameras. The first wave in 2017 was the benchmark, and then the second wave that was conducted in 2020 enabled us to look at what are some trends around people's and communities' perceptions around the road safety cameras. Interestingly, I am right in the middle now of having the third wave conducted, which will be a really useful set of information to help us understand then over the last 6 years just what has been the shift and where do we sit in terms of people's perceptions around the road safety cameras and around integrity, around accuracy, reliability, and what did people really understand in terms of the impact cameras have around reducing road trauma and saving lives. So be mindful of that. When I finalise that third wave and I table that with the Minister and I'd share that with the road safety partners, that will be published publicly as well on my website. So you'll be able to access that and analyse and interpret things yourself. But I'll just call out a few interesting points from the second wave in 2020. Acknowledged this was now 3 years ago. But in that second wave, it was noted that the confidence in the management of the road safety cameras in Victoria pretty much remained on a par from the first year, with around 34 to 36% people recognising they had confidence in how it was managed. At that, of course, managed then since 2018 by Department of Justice and Community Safety. Victorians appear to be more educated about road safety cameras and appear to have more confidence in the integrity of the system than they did in 2017. There was indicators of a shift in that way. Public perception that speed cameras and red light cameras are more about making money than road safety indicators that perception had declined by 2020 over that last 3 years. Although public perception on the fairness of speed cameras increased slightly in that second wave. And it appeared from the survey that receiving a fine appeared to have negatively influenced people's perceptions of both the accuracy and the fairness. So there's an element there around the enforcement experience in terms of behaviour change, but also perhaps how it impacts your perceptions around road safety cameras. 1 in 4 people in that second wave reported having witnessed an increase in dangerous driving during Victoria's lockdown periods, because this was done in 2020. I just call that out as an interesting fact. As you know, there is a current parliamentary inquiry with a term of reference looking at the impact of the COVID lockdown period around people's behaviours on the roads. Another fact in that survey was that although more Victorians agreed that they were speeding when fined in wave 2, so 38% compared to 32% in 2017, the likelihood to link speeding with dangerous driving still remained low. The biggest discrepancy between speeding and dangerous driving seemed to be in the 105 to 109 kilometre per hour speed setting. In that 2020 return, 1 in 4 people disagreed that level of excess speed constituted that they saw that as speeding, and 2 in 5 disagree that that represented dangerous speeding. So it's some interesting data in that survey. Whilst it was designed around perceptions on road safety cameras, I trust that there will be some real qualitative data in that the road safety partners, can access and look at how that might be useful for them as well. The final point I'll highlight, because Alex talked a bit about this, was that in that 2020 survey, point-to-point cameras have a higher level of awareness compared to the more then being trialled technology of distracted driving and seatbelt cameras. So it just highlights the need for the transparency, but also the VIC recommendation about making as much information publicly available to help people come along the journey and understand the value of road safety cameras. So I'll just share those, handful of findings out of that survey. But as I said, the timing, if we were doing this perhaps lunchbox chat in a month and a half, I would be able to talk about the third wave results. But keep your eye out for that when it comes. I just want to close it out with this. My role, my value in this role, my background was in policing. I had 40 odd years with Victoria Police. I spent about 10 years in and out of working in road policing and heading up road policing and road policing operations. And in that role, I was the executive sponsor and leader for a number of introductions of new road policing technologies, including automatic number plate recognition, including radar speed detection technology, road safety cameras, and also technologies addressing impaired driving, drink and drug driving. And one of the critical learnings for me out of that experience was how vital it is that any new technology that is introduced is done in a way that it has the highest level of integrity, accuracy and reliability, because if it risks not having the trust of the community as well as the partnership, well then it is not likely to have that effect to change behaviours. I come into this role with the benefit of having been persuaded by the very convincing evidence of the value of enforcement, the behavioural change and deterrence theories, and where automated technology fits into that. I'm just going to close it out. Chris, I was going to share a couple of slides, but I choose not to because of the time there. But I've been asked several times around this technology or that technology in Queensland or New South Wales or somewhere, why don't we have it in Victoria? One of the things I kind of talk to, because it's not my role, I don't manage the road safety camera program. Other authorities work very well together to do that here in Victoria. But my position has consistently been this, that what I've observed now coming into this role to what I observed in 2011 as the then acting Assistant Commissioner in road policing in Victoria was that Victoria's come an awful long way in terms of the governance and the maturity around its process around designing, trialling, developing and introducing camera technology. In 2020, a previous commissioner made recommendations out of a particular investigation looking at cameras around Rosanna Road in Heidelberg. And one of the recommendations there resulted in the department establishing and putting together a really robust strategic framework to really guide the development and the future and the management of the road safety cameras. And part of that framework has a strategy around research and development. I'm confident that this has put Victoria in a good place, and as I represent the community, can advise that any new technology that is explored and brought into Victoria, I encourage the department to resist the urge to just leap onto a technology because it's in use in another state. or another jurisdiction, notwithstanding it potentially is having a good impact on changing high-risk behaviour. But the feedback I get from around the liaison I have from around other jurisdictions beyond Australia as well is that Victoria has an extraordinary high benchmark to meet to bring in and maintain any new technology. So I continue to hold that position in my advice to the Minister, but also when asked by the media and when I speak to the public on my website, how important it is that we, in Victoria, the Road Safety Partnership, stick true to that strategic framework. And I've written publicly through earlier this year how I've kind of overseen and seen that with the final development and implementation of the distracted driving and seatbelt cameras in Victoria.
Thank you, Neville. I'm glad you said about the slides, because I'm thinking, when's he putting the slides up? Thank you for that overview and certainly letting us know more about the role of the Road Safety Camera Commissioner. And I know that you'll put into the chat the link, and it certainly has a lot of data on there. I know when I was doing some study, I certainly went to that site quite a bit to look at some of the offences around speed in particular. So thank you, Glenn, Alex and Neville, for giving an introduction into your perspectives on this topic. I'd really like to open it up to questions, Q&A, and get a conversation happening. And I know that there's a couple of things in the chat. Doesn't look like people have used Q&A, so keep using the chat. And I will invite you to speak to your questions. So I'm just looking, we've got a few in there already. Hopefully a few of the rest of you have got some bubbling away as well to ask. And Max, you're first off the ranks with a question to Glenn. Would you like to speak to that, please?
Yes, and Glenn has already given me a written response, but basically it was a bit of a Dorothy Dixer. There's a strong opinion amongst the community that being intercepted at the roadside for speeding by a police officer has immediate effects and is much more effective than a camera detection. And I was really suggesting that the advantage of camera detections is you can catch many more speeders and ultimately change their behaviour than you could ever hope for by detections at the roadside. But I'll leave that to Glenn to comment.
Thanks, Max.
No, thanks, Chris and Max, and I agree. And as I said in the chat, you know, I don't think these two things sit apart. That's certainly complementary. You're absolutely right that the ability to do the volume detection through automation is far more than policing. And I think Alex made the point around the discretionary part that we all still hold with the Office of Constable comes that discretion. But as I said in the chat, the advantage of a face-to-face interaction to determine what else is going on apart from speeding, whether there's an impairment issue, there might be an unauthorised driver issue, and that swiftness of sanction that comes with the immediate interception of face-to-face interaction, and then if appropriate the issue of a penalty notice, or is there something else going on? Is there, you know, we have, it happens every day where we detect people for speeding and we know you know, there may be another issue related to their behaviour, and we don't know that just by a detection through camera. So I think, as I said, they are complementary. They work together. They are different parts, but that random, the people thinking that random intercept by police is still a possibility that moderates their behaviour. The anywhere, anytime that certainly mobile cameras have. Fixed cameras have a place to play, but again, they're different to mobile cameras, which can be aware any time. But I agree with you, Max, that I think that impact of having and it's good for our people as well, that craft of policing that we, you know, as automation increases, the craft of policing and that ability to speak to people and get an understanding of what is going on and what might be some of the triggers of their behaviour is really important. So I don't think they act in isolation. They're certainly complementary tactics, if you like.
Thanks, Glenn. I'm going to move on to Andrew Hillier now. Andrew, would you like to speak to your question?
Yes, I will. Thank you very much. I'm just wondering, with the adaptation of cameras to be able to do many, many more things nowadays, is the process of we're just going to put a camera here for speed, how's that now evolving to keep the public on side? I'm not sure whether that's for Alex or Neville probably, but yeah, multiple cameras able to do different things. How do we decide where we're placing them?
Alex, Neville, Glenn, who would like to speak to that? Or anyone on our agenda?
So we are involved in the selection of sites for mobile cameras, certainly, and we work. So the current, the rollout of the cameras and the trailer cameras for distraction offences, we're involved in that as well. And I mean, it's primarily done to reduce trauma. So it's based on a history, particularly around the speed, the mobile cameras, the speed, history of trauma, history of complaint, history of behaviour. We don't just, that looks, and there are certain other parameters as well that comes into Neville's world as well to ensuring the integrity of the program, that there's no barriers or unfairness involved in the site selection. But it's not stick the finger in the air and have best guess. There is science behind it, and we're certainly held to account by the Road Safety Camera Commissioner's Office because we've seen Neville mentioned the Rosanna Road. I think we've had other instances where cameras have been set up and there's been mistakes made. And, so ultimately we're responsible for deciding whether to issue, and then if we have issued, whether to withdraw infringements, which I do on a regular basis. And then, that site selection and the operating is revisited to make sure that the integrity of the program is maintained. Because if we haven't got that, the public confidence, as Neville talks about, then we've got nothing really.
So, Chris, I can, I guess, contribute to that, and I'll caveat that, as I said earlier, I don't manage the road safety camera program. The Road Safety Partners, Department of Justice does. But in terms of my work, that question's a really good question because it goes directly to a key focus area of mine. And I spoke about this and wrote on my website, as I advised the Minister, with the distracted driving and seatbelt technology that commenced enforcement on the 1st of July in Victoria, that the developing maturity around the process for site selection for that technology is one of the 3 key areas I'll continue to focus on with the department over the next 12 months. As Glenn described, there's a process, there's criteria that the site selection committee look at to ensure that the placement of a enforcement camera is actually evidenced to address one of a number of issues, whether it be the high rate of road trauma at that area or the high evidence of high risk behaviour in that area. What I can say is that many sites are actually informed by requests by members of the public seeking to have camera enforcement at a particular area, generally in their street. So as the Camera Commissioner, my office gets a lot of those inquiries come to my office. Now, we point them in the direction of the Camera Saves Lives website. And if people are not familiar with that, I'd encourage them to put that in their browser, the Camera Saves Lives website. When I talked about the VAGO recommendation, and part of the Commissioner's role is to look at the public available information around the camera systems, that is a key development and something that the department are continuing to work on and develop and keep me abreast, through which people can get that information. And through that website, people can actually request consideration of a certain location. But people don't get a camera somewhere simply because they ask. It simply puts a request into that selection process. And my position on behalf of the community is that any decisions are always evidence-based, just to keep that level of integrity. I'll continue to focus on that with the distracted driving cameras, because this is now a new technology, and I'm very interested and keen to see how that continues to mature to ensure those sites are evidence-based.
Thanks, Neville.
If I might just very quickly say, it's very worth noting that every jurisdiction has a slightly different approach to site selection. So obviously you've heard the Victorian approach, but the approach is not necessarily the same in every state across the country. And so you have different competing philosophies. One might, you might require a demonstrated history of actual trauma in some jurisdictions, while others might be risk-based and others might be just on a suppression, anywhere, anytime philosophy. And we've got different flavours right across the country of all of those simultaneously.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, I'm going to move to David Beck. Would you like to speak to your question, David?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, it's just a question. I know that there's a lot of negativity around speed cameras being all about revenue raising. So the demerit point system levels that field and eliminates that question. I'm just wondering if there's been any talk about the focus being on those non-financial punitive measures or any other measures that might be out there that can't be accused as being methods for revenue raising.
Thank you, David. Who would like to speak to that?
I'd love to add one thing on this. Is something that I believe and I've spoken about before, which is just the social equity of our current penalty regime. Our current penalty regime across Australia is a one-size-fits-all regime. And so, if you're the CEO of a company, getting a $200 fine in the mail is not that significant, while if you're on minimum wage, it is totally life-altering. And so, when you look at some other countries, they have, means-tested penalties and things like that. And I just wish that we could do more in Australia down that line. So, on the one hand, you've got the detection of the offence, and then from that detection, we need to determine what is both the fairest but the most effective way to change behaviours.
Thanks, Alex. Glenn?
I'll always stay out of the penalty. It's a matter for government to set the penalties. We don't, we don't set them. We enforce the penalty, and away we go. Pardon me, I listen to what Alex says, and I agree. But setting penalty range is clearly a matter for government, not something for policing.
I think I saw in the media recently someone getting fined for speeding at $250,000 fine or something. I think it was America. I'm not 100% sure where
No, so we do have different levels of corporate infringements for corporately registered vehicles and that is a constant battle that we face with some organised crime entities hiding behind corporately registered vehicles, and the fines for those are significant. Government have set those significantly higher for people who don't nominate a driver, but it's probably a slightly different question and taking up Alex's point, but yeah, that be a really interesting chat if government want to go down that path.
Thanks. Neville, did you have anything you wanted to add to that?
Yeah, look, I'll be cautious. It's a good question. It's outside the scope of my role is on the Act, but I continue to point to people about research. In this case, it's probably a question that takes people back to understanding research around deterrence theory and behaviour change and what the actual enforcement experience, how that fits in. So I'll leave it at that, just to keep reminding people, go back to understand the evidence base behind decisions that are made. But outside of that, that's not something within my terms of my role.
Thanks, Neville. A question for you, Alex, from Ray Shuey. Ray, would you like to speak to your question?
Yes, thanks, Chris. I was concerned about some of the false positives and false negatives, particularly in New South Wales and Queensland before the implementation of the strategies in Victoria. But as an integrity issue, I think it's healthy for the community to know what those are in terms of both the mobile camera systems and also the seatbelt enforcement. So I'd appreciate any commentary on that. Thanks, Alex.
Yeah, thanks very much for that question, Ray. Great question. I guess when we look at a mobile phone offence and also seatbelt offences, they can often be quite subjective. So it's sometimes a little bit hard to rule something in or out as clearly an offence. I mean, and we have different rules right across the country in terms of what we will or we won't enforce. And so, two hands on the phone, okay, very, very clear, let's enforce that. And you got one hand on the phone, then you got the phone on the person, the phone in the lap, the phone in all kinds of different positions. And at the end of the day, I mean, you've got multiple layers within this system. So obviously it starts at the camera side where you have an artificial intelligence-based system that is screening out the very vast majority of traffic right there and then. And so, you've got, let's say, and the numbers are all different. It all depends on what's the background rates of actual offending. But let's say as like a nice rule of thumb that 99% of traffic is just excluded right there at the camera. And so then you've got 1% of traffic that could very well show offending behaviour that will then go through different layers of human review. So, and obviously I can only comment on the interstate programs rather than the Victorian program. But interstate, you'll have a first level of human review that is done by the vendor, so by us. It's a very quick one. Subjectively, is this showing, an offending behaviour that the state wants to prosecute or not? And then that will then go on to the government, and the government has its own levels of human review, multiple levels, where you've got different adjudicators looking at it again against the rules to say, okay, this is in or this isn't out. So you've actually got, by the time you've gone end to end, basically 4 different screening tools to say whether, 3 of them being human, to go that this is actually a mobile phone offence that the state does want to prosecute. When you look at then what gets challenged through the courts, I mean, it's a very, very low rate in these programs that do get challenged through the court system. And then, of course, you do very occasionally get those that go through the media. Sometimes they, it's a genuine mistake that 4 people in a row or a machine and 3 people can genuinely make a mistake. Sometimes you don't see all the evidence that's actually there within the media. And so there's all different kinds of things that can happen through this process, but it's a very low number.
Thanks, Alex. I'm going to go to 2 last questions because I can see the time is not very long now. But Duncan McRae, would you like to speak to your question?
Yeah, thanks, Chris. I think with speeding cameras and mobile phone cameras, it's very easy to get a good evidence base to justify the argument or the allegation of revenue raising. But seatbelt ones, I'm wondering how. Certainly, we know that there are certain communities, for example, rural communities, that have got much higher rates of seatbelt offence. What have we got as a way to address the allegation that we're victimising a particular community or cohort within the community? Because it's somewhat different to speeding or mobile phone use in that it can be a very small minority group that's causing the offences. Any thoughts on that one?
Alex, Glenn or Neville?
Yeah, Duncan, not a perception or claim of victimisation that I'm aware of, certainly in Victoria. I mean, we have seen, we also get, it's a cultural thing too. So we had a terrible collision where 4 people were killed up near Shepparton early in the year who were fruit pickers who'd come over from India. And of course, in a lot of Indian states, they're just starting to mandate the wearing of seatbelts. So we see that cultural gap. So we're certainly working with new and emerging communities to address that. And also, we're seeing technology catch up with that, because a lot of cars now yell at you if you don't wear your seatbelt, of course. So, and we've seen that play out through the distracted driver cameras that Justice have rolled out. But I'm not aware of sort of any perception or suggestion that there's victimisation of those groups. I haven't grown up in the country myself, and worked in a farm a lot. It is more prevalent, but I don't see that when we enforce that people feel like they've been victimised.
Thanks, Glenn. Any other comments there?
I guess, Chris, I guess for me, thank you, Duncan, for that question. It's I think back, it's not something that comes through my inquiry line from the public that I could say that I would have identified it as some issue that I need to raise with the department or the minister. But probably the only question I've had that might relate to it was more of a media interest question when I was asked earlier this year about the geographical spread of camera sites and locations, east and west, around that. And I spoke then, and I reinforced that, for my work, I very much focus on the integrity of the site selection and the evidence base around the road trauma benefit. And I would be very disappointed if I felt there was some thought about putting some sort of geographical spread in that mix, simply to, so we got as the same here and there. So, Duncan, I hope that sort of gives you some back as well, that in my work, how I continue to focus on ensuring that level of integrity stays around the decision making that's based on evidence and is supported by data and complaints.
Thanks, Neville. Look, I know we're a bit over time, but I'd like to go with our last question from Arthur before we wrap up. Arthur?
Yes, hi everyone, and I just want to say this has been a very great forum or webinar with really very informative talk about this, and I think it should have been a little bit more expanded for a little bit longer, but it's great. So just a technical sort of query or comment, really. It's query. In my experience, about over 20 years of traffic engineering, I've worked at other councils, and usually councils are the first point of contact when they get either nabbed by a camera or they see a flash going off at fixed intersections. So my query on this is that the common thing that sort of comes up is that the amber light's been too short, and the camera took a photo of me whilst I was still in the intersection, and there are all these things that need to be sort of clarified. And out of my own curiosity, I'd really like to know more about when it comes down to the technology side, because I've got an experience in data collection and understanding on advanced infrastructure technologies as well, and how will it evolve in the future, where you've got emergency services with the ability to change signals as they go through for emergency situations, and where is that sort of common ground and understanding?
Thank you, Arthur. Would anyone like to speak to that?
Happy to say, from a design perspective, when you're designing a red light enforcement camera, you've got two different jobs in red light enforcement. One is tracking the vehicles, and where is the vehicle in relation to wherever the enforceable point is, which is different in every jurisdiction as to, is it the stop bar, is it the extension of the curb? That every jurisdiction has a slightly different rule. I guess I'm talking globally. So you got to know when a vehicle passes a certain point and it's actually entered the intersection, and then you've got to track the timing of the lights, and the systems will track the duration of the amber phase, and it will track the time into red as well, and all that will be part of the evidence collected, and there will be different rules set as to like how long into the red will you be until an actual enforcement capture is created. And so then, the other people on the call set all the rules, or and other departments on just what are the amnesty periods and for different speed limits, for different amber times, etc. There's lots of different parameters that go into it. It follows a kind of a strict regime.
Thank you.
Yeah, I think that the common thing is like from what I remember hearing from community members is that the lights change very quickly, and they're in the intersection and they're not able to clear it as quickly as they can, or there's other things. So this is the would there be a leeway to extend amber times? Would be a leeway to reconsider the timings of things so that intersections are kept clear, because I know they're not supposed to be in the intersection when the signals change. So it's up to each individual's judgment on how they approach an intersection. But I've noticed driving around in Victoria and Adelaide. In Victoria, there seems to be trims are quicker than compared to Adelaide. It's like a fixed type of where they've got speed cameras everywhere. It just basically you got a little bit more time, and there's a pause, and then traffic moves. So I don't know. I'm just putting this out there in this forum. So yeah.
Thank you. Any final word, Glenn or Neville?
No, you'll have to excuse me, Chris. I'm 6 minutes late for my next meeting. I'm sorry. So,
well, thank you so much.
No
and we
worries.
will wrap it up there. And I know that we didn't get to everyone's questions, but thank you, Glenn. Thank you, Neville. Thank you, Alex, for bringing your perspectives to this lunchbox chat. And it has, again, been a really good discussion and will leave us walking away with some different thinking and thoughts, and hopefully some bubble up of stuff that's come out of it. So thank you everyone for being in attendance today. And just a reminder that our lunchbox chats in Victoria will be held every second month, so we won't actually be back till February now because of December and January. But if you have any suggestions for future topics, please send me an email, and Lisa, if you can pop that into the chat, that would be wonderful. Send me an email, let us know, because we're really hoping to get a range of different topics with different perspectives and really engage our membership across Victoria in particular. But thank you, and we'll see you at our next event.
Thank you.
Thanks very much. Great to be with you.
Thanks, everyone.